I often think about how weird my family is, my extended family. And my mom's gonna listen to this, and she's gonna be like, "What? What?" um, but and so I think about it's weird. I often think about like looking at the world around me, and I think about, why is it that um, somebody could do something really nasty in this world? Or, why do they feel often that they can, screw other people over, or, um, just easily walk away from obligations, or do things that, uh, even doing something really, really nasty, right? Like I think about these things, and my default almost always is, how did somebody get there? And because my original training is a sociologist, I sort of learned about psychology later on, but I think I'm more imprinted as a sociologist. I default to thinking about, oh, um, it must be due to their social standing, or, what's going on in their life. And then I instantly start thinking about, like, I don't comprehend how somebody can actually do that. And the reason why I can't comprehend why somebody could be, nasty or whatever, is because the default logic in our house, the default language in the house that I was growing up, and I hope I'm passing on to my kids, is just love, right? Like it is, uh, um, you know, that you will always be unconditionally supported in the family. And it wasn't weird, manipulative kind of default, understanding of love that a lot of people actually have, right? And it wasn't sort of twisted with a lot of, um, just a lot of weird meanings and things like that. But it was just like, yeah, like I felt a deep sense of love in my family. And yes, there we all had problems. My mom and my dad definitely had their fair share of things that were going on, and um, they had their own, like it or not, personalities. And the same with their parents, right? Like they had their um personalities, characteristics, I guess, that were deeply, deeply flawed in many ways, but also deeply, I don't know what the word is, like benefit, right? Like I'm thinking about both sides, that there was something that was going on there. And with that, even though that there was these like, yeah, I'm not sure that I would agree with everything that everybody, did. And um, but the default that everybody defaulted to, I think my dad's side had a little bit more of, it was a little bit more challenging. Um, it's just the sort of the way that things were, definitely a lot more challenging. And I think he wrestled with things a lot more with that. And he overcompensated, I think, tremendously. Is that it was this deep sense of, just plain old love in our family, right? Like it was something that, uh, no matter, if we screwed up or whatever, they would be there. They would be pissed, but they would be there, right? And I think in a weird way, my dad was always a little bit more. I was terrified. I had fear of my dad. I really did. But, I think back, he was always there to be supportive, right? Like there was always that was going on. And I think about, and the same with my mom, it's the same way. So, in their different families. My dad grew up in a very Polish immigrant family, very Polish immigrant, like hard. Um, it was basically if you weren't working by the time that you were 14 years old and you had to sort of raise yourself up, then you're kind of like trash, right? Like, and it was deeply Polish immigrant. My aunts were, um, there's arranged marriages and things like that. So deeply culturally about like you just freaking work, right? And everything was about that. But so they didn't have this like there was a strong sense of family unit on that side, but it was very different. And it was more baked in symbolism and things like that, meals and things like that. Having a big meal together was a big thing where you do things. But all of that, despite the fact that, and then on my mom's side, it was, she was, my grandma was was an orphan. Um, my grandpa, I think, really struggled with the Second World War, like extraordinarily uh, struggled with it. Became an alcoholic, but I'm gonna have to say the default language was love, right? The default always came down to that, and both of them, I would say maybe my dad's side was a little bit more on challenges with what that actually means. But I thank God for that, right? Like, I thank God that throughout our family history, it was always about, um, building people up, right? Like, yes, there was, and I struggle with that because it's not always the way, but it was, there was a respect for family. There was a respect for, um, trying to build that family unit. And I struggle with this because I understand that, there was different personalities in my family, but the default was very, very much sort of thinking about that. Then because my dad, I think, struggled more with this, his family was it was a lot more of a struggle, despite the fact that I kind of had this sort of sense of fear from him. Um, he overcompensated with trying to build this family unit, being supportive and being there for people. Um, so I thank God, right? Like I just think about this. It's like if I grew up in a different family, and it was just, dumb luck often, just stupid dumb luck. Yes, there's some personality things where people can be jerks, right? And that's why I struggle with this. And yes, there's, psychology behind all of this, but a lot of moments, I strongly believe, um, a lot of moments are because a lot of, where somebody does things that sort of go against what you expect a normal, decent human being to do is because they were raised that way, right? Like it was deeply part of their upbringing, and nobody sort of coached them on right or wrong, or trying to do the right thing. Like the default is to not harm other people, right? And when people in the family, or at least in my family, did wrong, right? The default was like, oh shit, they were doing wrong, right? Like a lot of families don't recognize that stuff, right? They don't do that. So I'm just deeply thankful to grow up in a family that has had a deep respect for, love and unconditional love to the best of our ability. And I think despite the fact that, yeah, we had a lot of messed up stuff, right? Like, despite the fact that there was a lot of crap that was growing, I grew up into without that respect for family, without that somewhat, unconditional love, um, that without any of that happening, it would have been far worse, right? There would have been a lot more that would have happened to us that would have been far, far, far worse. And I'm just deeply thankful of that, that, there was this, and I think my parents, um, they definitely thought about that. I think it was a very much a concerted effort to build that in. And I think it's so important to do those kind of things. Um, as I get older, I realize and I look at it, and I think sort of people that study education and people would look at this and they would say, yeah, there actually is very strong evidence that this actually does work. That's why you start seeing this in early childhood education of an emphasis on, fair play and dealing with conflict and, dealing with strong personalities and, all these kind of things where the default I want you to think about, like, what does a kindergarten teacher do? Right? They teach you how to often love in a very respectful way. And not all of us have this, right? And I think that was my advantage growing up is I was one of the first generations growing up in the 1980s where this was thought about, right? Like this was an important thing where people would think about these things and it wasn't emphasized nearly as much until the 1970s and 1980s where people started thinking about this. Um, and that's where, you know, the closing point that I'd love to talk about is I'm just excited about the future because there's so many other people that we're learning that this is important and we're emphasizing this in culture. That there is this underlying, what matters often is unconditional love, um, not in a manipulative sense, but a lot of people are thinking about this. This is often about culture, how there's somewhat of a cultural change that has happened over the last few decades where this is deeply ingrained, right? And I'm just very optimistic for our future. All right, take care and have a wonderful day.